I've known Ed Fulmer since I was in my mid-20s, and I think you were slightly above that age. I want to thank you, Ed, for that kind of introduction. It's always great to be back here at the Heritage Foundation. We're here today to explore the American idea, and I can't think of a better venue for this topic. The mission of the Heritage Foundation is to promote the principles of free enterprise, limited government, individual freedom, traditional American values, and let's not forget a strong national defense. These are the principles that define the American idea, and this mission has never been timelier because these principles are very much under threat from policies here in Washington today. The American idea belongs to all of us. It's inherited from our nation's founders. It's preserved by countless sacrifices from our veterans and advanced by visionary leaders, past and present leaders. What makes America exceptional, what gives life to the American idea, is our dedication to the self-evident truth that we are all created equal, giving us equal rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And this means opportunity, the perfection of our union, especially our commitment to equality of opportunity, has been a story of constant striving to live up to our founding principles. This is what Abraham Lincoln meant when he said, quote, "In giving freedom to the slave, we assure freedom to the free, honorable alike in what we give and what we preserve." This commitment to liberty and equality is something that we usually take granted. We take it for granted during times of prosperity, when a growing economic pie gives all Americans the opportunity to pursue their dreams, to provide a brighter future for their kids, or maybe just to meet their family's needs. These are tough times. We all know all too well that too many Americans are hurting today. And these hardships have reopened our long-standing national debate over what it means to be an exceptional nation. Had those periods of unprecedented prosperity in America's past been the product of our founding principles? Or, as some would argue, have we made it this far only in spite of our outdated values? Are we still an exceptional nation? Should we even seek to be unique? Or should we become more like the rest of the world, more bureaucratic, less hopeful, less free? The American idea is not tried in times of prosperity. Instead, it is tested when times are tough, when the pie is shrinking, when businesses are closing, and when workers are losing their jobs. Those are the times when America's commitment to equality of opportunity is called into question. That's when the temptation to exploit fear and envy returns, when many in Washington use the politics of division to evade responsibility for their failures and to advance their own narrow political interests. To my great disappointment, it appears that the politics of division are making a great comeback. Many Americans share my disappointment, especially those who were filled with great hope a few years ago, when then Senator Obama announced his candidacy in Springfield, Illinois. You remember that speech? Remember what he said? He said that what stopped us from meeting our nation's greatest challenge is, quote, "the failure of leadership, the smallness of our politics, the ease with which we are distracted by the petty and trivial, our chronic avoidance of tough decisions, our preference for scoring cheap political points instead of rolling up our sleeves and building a working consensus to tackle big problems." I couldn't agree more. And yet, nearly 3 years into his presidency, look at where we are now. Petty and trivial? Just last week, the president told a crowd in North Carolina that Republicans are in favor of, quote, "dirtier air, dirtier water, and less people with health insurance." Can you think of a pettier way to describe sincere disagreements between the two parties on regulation and health care? Chronic avoidance of tough decisions. The president still has not put forward a credible plan to tackle the threat of ever-rising deficits and debt. And it's been over 900 days since his party passed a budget in the United States Senate. A preference for scoring cheap political points instead of consensus building. This is the same president who is currently campaigning against a do-nothing Congress, when in fact the House of Representatives has passed over a dozen bills to help get the economy moving, to deal with the debt, only to see the president's party kill those bills in the do-nothing Senate. Look, we put our cards on the table. Everybody knows that. Earlier this year, the House of Representatives advanced a far-reaching plan filled with common-sense reforms aimed at putting the budget on the path to balance and putting the economy on the path to prosperity. But instead of working together where we agree, the president has opted for divisive rhetoric and the broken politics of the past. He's going from town to town, impugning the motives of Republicans, setting up straw men and scapegoats, and engaging in intellectually lazy arguments as he tries to build support for punitive tax hikes on job creators. The tax increases proposed by the Senate Democrats and endorsed by the president, when combined with the new taxes in the health care law and the president's other tax preferences, would push the top federal tax rate to roughly 50% in just 14 months, while doing nothing to promote job creation. This so-called tax increase on millionaires and billionaires would actually constitute a huge tax hike on the nation's most successful small businesses. According to the Tax Foundation, the surtax would hit roughly 35% of small business income. As P.G. O'Rourke put it so well, the good news is that according to the Obama administration, the rich will pay for everything. The bad news is that according to the Obama administration, you're rich. Actually, the news is even worse. As a practical matter, when you chase ever higher spending with ever higher tax increases, you eventually run into a brick wall of math. The president has been talking a lot about math lately. He's been saying that, quote, if we're not willing to ask those who've done extraordinarily well to help America close the deficit, the math says we've got to put the entire burden on the middle class and the poor. This is really a stunning assertion from the president. When you look at the actual math, you quickly realize that the way out of this mess is to combine economic growth with reasonable, responsible spending restraint. Yet neither of these things seem to factor into the president's zero-sum logic. According to the president's logic, we should give up on trying to reform our tax code to grow the economy and get more revenues that way. Instead, these goals are taking a back seat to the president's misguided understanding of fairness. Remember in 2008, in a presidential debate, when ABC's Charlie Gibson pointed out that raising the capital gains tax rate actually tends to drive revenues down? Then Senator Obama replied, well, Charlie, what I've said is that I would look at raising the capital gains tax for purposes of fairness. This kind of logic is what we are unfortunately seeing today. Also, according to this logic, spending restraint is incompatible with a strong, well-functioning safety net. The belief that recipients of government aid are better off the more we spend on them is remarkably persistent. No matter how many times this central tenet of liberalism gets debunked, just like Brett Favre, it keeps coming back. The president has wrongly framed Republican efforts to get government spending under control as hard-hearted attacks on the poor. In reality, spending on programs for seniors and for lower-income families continues to grow each and every year under the House-passed budget. It just grows at a sustainable rate. We direct tax dollars where they're needed most, and we stop spending money on boondoggles we don't need. The president's political math is a muddled mix of false accusations and false choices. The actual math is apolitical. By the time my kids are my age, according to the nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office, the size of government will be double what it is today. Government health care programs alone will have grown to consume 45% of all federal spending. The primary driver of this increase is runaway inflation in health care costs, which are rising at 2 to 3 times the rate of GDP. It's impossible to keep funding health care expenditures at this rate. Even President Obama has said, quote, if you look at the numbers, Medicare in particular will run out of money, and we will not be able to sustain that program no matter how much taxes go up. So the real debate is about how to best control these unsustainable costs. And if I could sum up the disagreement in a couple of sentences, I would basically say this. Our plan is to empower patients. Their plan is to empower bureaucrats. The Republican plan gives individuals the power to put market pressure on providers and make them compete. The President's plan is to give 15 unelected bureaucrats in Washington the power to cut Medicare in ways that, according to Medicare's own chief actuary, would simply drive providers out of business. This would result in harsh disruptions and denied care for seniors. Pain like this simply cannot be sustained. So when it comes to out-of-control spending on entitlements, the President's math simply does not add up. And his math is no better on the tax side. Let's say we took all the income from those the President calls rich, those people and small businesses making over $250,000. A 100% tax rate on their total annual income would only fund the government for 6 months, just 6 months. What about the other tax hikes that the President likes to talk about? Under the President's policies, deficits are set to rise by a whopping $9.5 trillion over the next 10 years. Letting the top two tax rates expire would equal roughly 8% of that planned deficit increase. Eliminating tax subsidies for oil and gas companies would only equal 0.5% of the President's planned deficits. What about corporate jet owners? That provision would reduce those deficits by 0.03%. Look, I am all for closing tax loopholes.